A good Woche to everyone here. I see we have also a participant from Netanya, from Eretz HaKodesh. So welcome for tonight's shiur. So we'll start off with a question which someone asked me to Behemshich. Last week we were talking about Nusach, so he was stimulated to ask about another Nusach. So here we have every Shabbos at Mincha to whether we say in our Nusach we say ka'amch k'Yisrael, and in the Vel they say ka'amch Yisrael. Now this is a quote from a pasuk, and it's a very similar pasuk. One is a pasuk in Sefer Shmuel. That's the Nusach which we have in our Sidurim, ka'amch k'Yisrael, and a almost identical pasuk in Divrei Hayomim, which says ka'amch Yisrael. So what's the reason for choosing the pasuk k'Yisrael rather than Yisrael, ka'amch Yisrael, which in effect is this similar, almost identical meaning. So what you have at the bottom of the screen is from the Sefer Pri Eitz Chaim. As you can see, it's identified as such, and the Pri Eitz Chaim was written by Reb Chaim Vital, a Talmud of the Arizal, and he has a Talmud called Rabbi Yaakov Tzemach. Perhaps he had another name, Yaakov Chaim Tzemach, who wrote comments, and that's where he prefaces with his name Tzemach. Nira li kizeh movin. What's the choice? It says Me'etz Chaim to say ka'amch Yisrael and not amka k'Yisrael, rather ka'amch Yisrael. So he says, according to what the Rav, which means the Arizal, on the pasuk of Yedu ki me'itcho hi menuchaso. So on the word me'itcho, so the Arizal says me'es chof, and chof stands for kiss, is the remez on the level of keser. Since this is the Kabbalah language, kizeu masha shalu hayesh havai bekerbenu shehuzo im oyin shehu arich. When the Yidden in the Midbar, when they were complaining, as before they might say with Amalek, they said, is a godly presence within us or not? And so ato yedu ki me'es keser, that there is a presence not only from the level of Zoh, but from the level of Arich, which is a level of keser, and Tebespar. So the Arizal had said that me'itcho is me'ez keser. So on this basis, the Reb Yaakov Tzemach says this is also the choice between the two psukim, ka'amch Yisrael, ka'amch k'Yisrael, because that's why the choice of ka'amch k'Yisrael, sheyoidin shemikesem u'shpoim ato, that the brocha comes from the level of keser, and that's why there's the k'Yisrael, kof Yisrael, keser, as a remez that the hashpor to Yidden is from a higher level, to dispel the doubts which the Yidden had when they were in the desert, whether they are receiving only from a lower level or from a higher level. So this is, the chof is a remez that they're receiving from the level of keser. That is, I know it's Kabbalah, but it's the question, why Nusach Arizal is this choice over that? So that's the reason I'll pick Kabbalah, and on the level of Pshat, they are probably pretty much identical. Let's go on to the next question. So I've got two related shilas, both about lo yilbash. So there is an idea that a man, as you see the quote from the Shulchan Aruch, a man mustn't preen himself in a feminine way. And one of the details on that is that a man should not remove the hair where on the body where there's naturally an accumulation of hair. He shouldn't be removing it even with the scissors, etc. Like says, the man would do so, he would be indulging in a feminine type of, call it cosmetics if you wish. Then it goes further. If it's normal for men to remove it also, he wouldn't get malchus. And then he goes on, b'misparayim b'chol mokim. Other than those two mentioned places, under the arms and lower down, where there's a natural large presence of hair, other parts of the body, one would be allowed to remove them with a misparayim, with the scissors, b'chol mokim. So as you read this, it looks like removal of hair of other parts of the body would be permitted with a scissors, with a close cut. However, Meforshim address this, and they say that this is only talking about the body, but not about the face. But there's something called a unibrow or monobrow, where sometimes a person has their eyebrows kind of are thick in the middle above the nose. There's also eyebrow, and people feel perhaps uncomfortable about it, or whether that could be removed. So this is part of this discussion here, when it says you are allowed to remove hair b'chol mokim, other than those two accumulations of hair. Does that include the face? So the Meforshim say it does not include the face, and certainly the Mahalach of the Tzemach Tzedek, as we're all familiar, that for a man to remove his beard, he says it goes into la yilbash. Now, the Ragatshova here was asked this, he addresses this question, and he has a fascinating proof. It says in Torah about the various blemishes which would disqualify a kohen. So one of them is gibein, or gibein oidak. So the word gibein has got 2 or 3 translations. One of these, gibein, means a hunchback, that a hunchback kohen wouldn't be able to do the avodah. Another one is the gevino. For some reason, the eyebrows are called the gevinim. The gevin is shoichvin. If his eyebrows are long, that they are like dangling down, so it's a bal. He becomes a balmum. So the Ragatshova says, I don't understand. I have a simple solution. Take a scissors and trim it off. For example, if a kohen has got a problem of bad breath, so it says in the Gemara that doesn't make him disqualified, because it's a simple solution. You can put some pepper in his mouth. Nowadays, talk about mint or something. It's a problem which can be solved. So if so, why does the kohen have a problem because he's got long eyebrows if you can trim them? Is that that even minat Torah you're not allowed to trim them? And it says in Shulchan Aruch you are allowed to trim the hair or other parts of the body. That's b'mokim mutzna. That's in our parts of the body which are normally covered. But on the face, which is normally exposed, then one wouldn't be allowed to. So this is Ragatshova, and I've seen in other Sforim also discussing that trimming eyebrows for a man would not be okay. Of course, those poskim who allow shaving the beard, I don't see how they could not allow trimming the eyebrows, culture cane. But according to the Ragatshova, etc., they're taking the view that he wouldn't be allowed to remove the eyebrows. By contrast, though, what would happen if a person has a presence of hair in an unusual place? So in the case of the monobrow, there are poskim who say that's not called, the whole issue here is not to preen yourself in a feminine way, but to remove hair which is not a normal presence. Then it's just trying to be like a regular person. It's not as if he's trying to pretend, he's not indulging in a feminine kind of cosmetics. He's just trying to be like the regular people, regular men. Therefore, if it's growing in a not normal place, then there are those who would allow. Similarly, which is coming to the next question about dyeing hair. We'll come to the dyeing in a moment. But here it just I did a bit of a search, and I found on the Yotzei Chochma Sefer, which specializes on the issue of lo yilbash. It's called snif melucha, as you see here. So he says a person who's got excess hair on his hands, and he's embarrassed about it, so he would be allowed to remove that hair. Similarly, if he's got on his nose or on his ears has got excess hair, so he would be allowed to remove it. That doesn't go into the issue of lo yilbash. As I said, it's only the hair which is in a normal place for regular man has a hair. To remove that would be an issue, but if it's an abnormal growth of a hair, then he would be allowed to remove it. Okay, so then this I say is hashgacha pratis. Someone asked me about the eyebrows, and someone asked me about dyeing the hair. This man is, I guess, in about 40s, in his probably mid 40s, and is getting a little bit grey. And his wife says you've had too much stress, and now Baruch Hashem, the cause of the stress has subsided, but meanwhile the hair is white, or some of it. So he's asking, and his wife is asking whether there's something he can do. So really, you read in Shulchan Aruch, again, it's the same siman about Kuf Pei Beis. It's very interesting. Where would you find the dinim in Rambam about a man not wearing feminine attire, etc.? So it's actually in Hilchos Avodah Zarah, because it looks like it was a pagan kind of belief and behavior that by dressing like the other gender, they would be able to draw energies, whatever it may be. And so it comes into Hilchos Avodah Zarah. So at the end of Hilchos, this is how it's interesting, how it's Shulchan Aruch. You have the first part of Yerdea talks about Basar B'cholov, Taruvas, etc., Shchita. But then it goes, the second part talks about Pas Akum, Bishul Akum, Cholov Akum. And then you got the Din of Avodah Zarah, Yain Nesech, Din of Avodah Zarah. Then you got Ribis. And then we've got a couple of Simonim, Kuf Pei Beis. So it talks about Lo Yilbash, a man not dressing like a woman, etc. At any rate, it says there the following: that a man to remove a white hair from amongst the black hairs is he would be in violation of Lo Yilbash. And v'chein also leish litzboya saras levonas yiyu shchayres. A man would not be allowed to dye white hair that they should look black. Afilu sara achas. So just to come back to the point which I was raising before, if it's just to look more handsome, etc., then that is clearly what the Shulchan Aruch is talking about. There may be sometimes it's quite common. People have a shock of white hair in the middle of the black hair, and it can be very embarrassing. A person, what's happened to you? Why do you have this? And, not everyone is tactful when they meet someone, and so it's an awkward situation. And so he wants to, not because he wants to become more handsome, he just wants to get this nuisance out of the way. So there are poskim who do allow it. So again, to the Shulchan Aruch is clearly talking about a person who wants to look younger, more handsome. If it's for other motives, there is a room to be mekel. Reb Moshe Feinstein was asked about a person who wants to dye his hair because he looks older than he is, and he wants to be able to get a job, and this is his white hair is obstructed. So he says, listen, if you're old and you want to deceive an employer, that's deception. But if you're young, it's just you have unusually, and you're not doing it to become more attractive. You just want to be able to get a job. So Reb Moshe it does allow him to color his hair to look his age. But coming back to this fellow, as I say, he's in his 40s. It's not so unusual to have a few white hairs when you're 40. I've got news for him. The next one's going to come not too long after. So don't work too hard. So now, but he asked me the following: is he able to use a kind of shampoo which is going to stimulate that the body will produce color? So what happens as a person ages, I guess, so the body does not produce so much color for the hair, and therefore the hairs grow white. So there apparently are some kinds of medicines of sorts. So Reb Moshe Feinstein was asked about using a medicine to color the hair, and he says, I don't see any difference whether you're using dye or you're using a medicine. It's the end product. Is it going to be, you're doing efforts to look, to look young, etc. Having said that, I still think there's a difference. And I said, listen, you're telling me you want to use this shampoo. Does a blonde Do you need to have a blonde shampoo for a blonde beard and a black shampoo for a black beard? Or is it just a simple chemical? And whatever color you naturally are or were is going to come out that color. So I felt if it's just a chemical to stimulate a natural production of color, I don't see that going into the issue of the Shulchan Aruch of coloring. He's stimulating his body to produce a natural color. Whereas if you have to have a black shampoo for a black beard and a blonde shampoo for a black or brown shampoo for a brown beard, then that clearly is a form of color, and that wouldn't be okay. Yes, so they mentioned here about shiduchim also. Yes, so again, to deceive that you're younger than you are, that would not be okay. That's deception. But if a person for shiduchim, he looks older than he is, then there is room to be makel. If it's necessary, like ask a shiur. Okay, a very practical shiur as we're going close to Pesach, and people are some people are conscious of how much matzah they can eat and can handle. And yes, you know, if you ate matzah and then, thanks to the morer and the strong wine and the hard egg, you threw up afterwards, you are yotze. You don't, by having thrown up the whole, you're still yotze the mitzvah, even though you threw up, but it's obviously not so comfortable. So now, the question is, what are the quantities which are necessary? So here we have from the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch in Hilchos Pesach, and that's in Siman Tesvav. Sorry, Tov Pevov, Siman Tov Pevov, and he discusses the concept of kazayis, and there are two opinions whether kazayis is a half an egg or a bit less than a third of an egg, and that comes up in the dinim of eruv. What is the quantity for an eruv? So it comes up, there's two very interesting, they're quite distant, these two opinions, whether kazayis is a half an egg or it's, which is American measurement, about 1 fluid ounce, or it's 2/3 of that. It's just under a third of an egg. And the conclusion here, Lamaisa, is if it's a mitzvah shel Torah, we're going to take the stricter view and have a kazayis the size of a half an egg. If it's a mitzvah d'Rabbanon, then you can go down to a third of an egg. And so that's going to be very useful, because at Seder night, we have the first kazayis is a mitzvah min haTorah. The second kazayis, which is with Korech, is d'Rabbanon, and so too is Afikoman is d'Rabbanon. Certainly, if you have your own kaira, you're going to have a kazayis from the top matzah and a kazayis from the middle matzah. Certainly, min haTorah, it doesn't matter whether you have from the top matzah or the middle matzah. So therefore, you can go down to have a kazayis d'Rabbanon from the top matzah and a kazayis d'Rabbanon from the middle matzah, and between the two together, you've certainly exceeded the shiur of a kazayis min haTorah. So here we're looking at the shiur for kazayis. I've taken this, one a very important point. Are the shiurim in weight or are the shiurim in volume? And it's very clear that the shiurim are actually shiurim of volume. It's very difficult to establish the volume of something as porous as a matzah. So there's, we have a couple of mechaberim who've indulged in this and make a chlorite. And so here I'm using the sefer here called Shiur Kazayis. It's an English volume by Feldheim called Kazayis by someone called Rabbi, I think it's Pinchas Bodner. And so he has a study of all different foods, but what's relevant for us is what is the Kazayis of matzah. So on the right side on the screen, we've got here for a kazayis d'oraisa, for achilas matzah. On the left side of the screen, we've got kazayis for korech, which is a chiur d'Rabbanan. And so what he's recommending for achilas matzah, he talks about 2/5 of a matzah. Let's look at the medium matzah. Yeah? So you've got some very thin matzah, and the thinner the matzah is, the more of a matzah you'd need to get your kazais, obviously. But in a medium matzah, so then he has here like 41%, in other words, 2/5 approximately of the matzah. Now this is, so if you have your own kaira, you're going to have more than that in any case between the two kazais from the top of the middle matzah. For the other people at the table who don't have their own kaira, so then this is the shiur you should be looking at, less than half a matzah. That's for the first kazais. For the second, for the kazais of Korech, so here we have about a quarter of a matzah is enough. And similarly for Afikoman, you can also manage with a quarter of a matzah. So I hope you can, this will be helpful for some people who find the Mitzva of Matzo difficult to handle, to ingest so much matzah. So bringing it down to practically, if you are running, have your own seder plate, it's going to be for mitzvahs. The first eating matzah will be about half a matzah because of kazais from the top, kazais from the middle, then a quarter, and then a quarter for Afikoman. Of course, lechatchila you should have 2 kazais of Afikoman, but that you can see whether you can handle or not. So really, in total, it's 1 total matzah for the whole seder. Yeah, because if you had for the first part you had 2 quarters, and then for Korech a quarter, and then for Afikoman a quarter, it's 1 whole matzah, which you'd need for the whole seder. So someone's asking, what's considered thick, medium, or thin? So there are very thin matzahs. There's a company called Kehila called Fulfil Salem. They produce matzahs which are so thin, they're mamish, very easy to bite into, very, very thin. Then you've got the matzahs which are made for export. So they make them lechatchila thicker so that they should be able to withstand the shipping, etc. And then you've got, so you can see they're thicker. They're about certainly more than 2 millimeters thick. And then you've got the regular matzah. I think that the regular matzah is what we'd call medium. The fact that you got a lot of broken matzahs in your packet is probably because you got medium and not thick. If they were thick, they would endure the journey. Okay, let's move on. So here, one of our listeners on the recording lives in Canada, and where he lives, it's quite north. Shliach. So the first night they make a seder, and they have a public seder, and of course they will have the kazayas before chatzos, etc. The second night they like to keep it more for family, so the children should have the feeling that they had their own seder. They have a few guests also, but they want to be able to take time now because it's so far north. So from Nacht until Chatzos is not such, is let's say 2 hours, and then on top of it we are now in a leap year, so it's going to be the window for the seder till Chatzos is quite short, and so we're not talking about the kazais of Afikoman. I'm talking about the first kazais. I remember once a shliach told me that they're used to making a public seder, and then they start their own seder afterwards, and they have their kazais matzah can be 2 o'clock in the morning, which I was a little bit shocked because. So all right, let's explain something. There are poskim who hold, there are tanoim who hold that the Mitzva of Matzo is only until Chatzos. We all know that we say every morning in davening, Pesach nechel ela b'layla ve'ein nechel ela at Chatzos. The Korban Pesach is only until Chatzos. We all know the Mishnah in Brachos, which says, Kol ma she'omru at Chatzos mitzvos not she'ala amud hashachar. And if it says Chatzos, really min ha'Torah tzad amud. But the Tanoim will say that Korban Pesach is min ha'Torah until Chatzos. So we have here 2 opinions. How important is it to have the kazayas matzah before chatzos. They Dogel Nervova, you have him quoted here on the screen. What the upper quote is from my Sefer Mistei Ashlichus, Chelik based. So the Noida Yehuda has his comments on the margin of the Shulchan Aruch, known as Dogel Nervova. And he says that if a person for pressure did not manage to eat the kazayis until chatzos, he shouldn't make a brocha al achilas matzah, because there could be, the halacha is that after chatzos you're not making the mitzvah. So you shouldn't make a bracha al achilas matzah after chatzos. So that becomes quite a serious thing. That to say that if you delay starting the seitel after chatzos, you possibly missed out on the mitzvah matzah. So the first night, for sure, one should make every effort to have the first kazayis. We must start to have the ka'amch Afikoman, but the first kazayis, for sure, one shouldn't miss chatzos for the first kazayis. So as I was saying, this in Geman was saying that they would make a public seder and then start their own seder and have the first kazayis at 2 o'clock in the morning. They're missing out possibly in a mitzvah min haTorah, which is not recommended. So find a way of making sure that the first kazayis before chatzos. Afikoman is also good, but at least the first kazayis. But then I'm looking at the Hayom Yom. Hayom Yom for Tezvov Nisan. It says the following. The first Seder, the Rebbe Rashab used to make it short in order to be able to eat the Afikoman before chatzos. The second Seder, Hoyamarich, he took his time. Maschil Lifnei Shortes started before 9 p.m. and we finished Gimel Dal Chatzos. It was finished about 3 or 4 a.m. Hoyamarich Bebira Hagod, and he took time, expanded on the Hagod. So I'm asking you practically, when it says Hoyamarich Bebira Hagod, when did they have the first kazayis? They started at 9 o'clock. Does it mean that they had the kazayis before chatzos and then Marich Bebir Hagod, and that took so long that it made the seder last till 4 o'clock in the morning? Or does it mean Moyamar Bebir Hagod, and by the time they got to Shulchan Aruch, it was well after chatzos, and then they had the meal, and then afterwards they had the end of the seder. How long does it take? The halal, whatever. All right, give it an hour to be very generous. But what took them till 3 o'clock in the morning? So bepashtus, it means that the kazayas matzah was also they took a long time over the actual Haggadah, and they started matzah even after chatzos, well after chatzos. That's my impression, and there is room. The other poskim also say about this, although the Noida Yehuda has said that you cannot make the bracha al achilas matzah after chatzos, it looks like other poskim are not so rigid about it. At least the second. So the first night I wouldn't be makel, but the second night I think that is what it's saying in the it doesn't say so clearly, but I think that is the pshat. Okay. Someone is suggesting that perhaps the Haggadah was discussed over the meal after the first kasais. Of course, that is a possibility. Someone's also suggesting Marich during this. I find it unlikely. I don't think that's that. I don't think that's not the posh pshat at least. Yeah, you read it. That's not the impression you get. I wasn't there, so I can't testify. All right, let's take a look at a couple of points here. For achilas matzah, do you need a kazayis from each Kohen and Levi, or a kazayis from the two together? So, of course, the mitzvah is to have from the top matzah and from the middle matzah kazayis from each. What I was saying before is that's a dinner. That's all of the rabbanon, and if you don't have a full kazayis from either matzah, but together you're having a kazayis, so you certainly fulfill the mitzvah in haTorah. So therefore, I'm saying you can have a quarter of matzah from the Kohen matzah, a quarter of matzah from the Levi matzah, and so you're covered on both bases. You're covered with the rabbanon, you're covered in haTorah. You're asking how many. Someone's asking how many matzahs to a pound for medium and thick. Sorry, I didn't go through that in advance. I wouldn't be able to answer now. Okay, let's move on. Okay, what's the next point? So here I got a shaila this week. It's a baby was given Haggadah. Sorry, I forgot Haggadah. Baby was given a bris. He was given a bris on the 7th day. What has to be done now? Now we know that the bris has to be done the 8th day. So here, I was about to say, to do Hatofas Dam bris, which I'll discuss in a moment. But before answering, I took to Halocho. And so I look in the Panorama, and this is in Reish Samach Beis, I believe, year Daya, and it says, Ovar mol balaylo, if a bris was done at night, there needs to be what's called pricking, to cause a little bit of blood from the bris area. It's a small prick. There's details of Moelim will know exactly where to do it, or they'll ask a Shaila where to do it. There's discussion about it. It was almost Shimon in Kovetz Razash. There's some discussion about it. Okay, so if the bris was done at night, so then one would have to do Hatofas Dam bris. Moloi toich shmoino uvayoim. If it was done before the 8th day, but it was done during the day, yotza. So there are more, seems to be clearly saying that you do not have to do anything, Hatofas Dam bris, if the bris was done within 8 days. So I texted this fellow in Eretz Yisrael, and I said, you don't have to do anything. The Rebbe to geholfen that there's something called Panorama of Halacha, and I need to find something to talk about. So I do Chazara. So I looked into this, and it bothered me because I didn't see the logic. What could be the difference if the bris was done at night? And that's wrong. You have to do Hatofas Dam bris to rectify it. And if a bris was done within 8 days, before 8 days, you don't have to do anything. I didn't see any logic. The more says so, fine. So and I started looking at it, and I saw that both the Shach and the Taz, they disagree with the Ramah, and they challenge the Ramah on this point, and they say, no, there's taka no difference. And you do have to do Hatofas Dam bris if a premature bris was done, then Hatofas Dam bris is required. I looked up in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, because you have, in other words, you have the Ramah, the Shach and Taz. The Ramah says one way, Shach and Taz say the opposite. How do you pass him? Of course, more likely passing like that. But I was looking, so Kitzur Shulchan Aruch Nichas Mila doesn't discuss it. It's like it's not a common situation, and so the Shlomo Gansfried didn't feel the need to quote it, to discuss it. But here I've got here from the lower quote is from the Seder Derech HaChaim from Yaakov Lisa, and he says, "Oval Amol Balaylo." So if you do the bris at night, you need to do Hatofas Dam bris. Second last line, if the bris was done within 8 days during the day, Nami Dina Hochi, and he gives a reference to the Yeridayim, which I just quoted, and the Shach in Reish Samach Daled, where he disagrees with Ramah, and he says that you'd have to do Hatofas Dam bris. So I got back to this fellow in Eretz Yisrael. I said, I have to correct what I said, and Hatofas Dam bris will be necessary. Okay. I see here a couple of points, as recalled 8. Back to the question about how many matzahs fit into I guess you're talking about a pound. So Yehuda ben Shimon is saying that in a medium pound, a medium thickness, you'll have 8 matzahs. If it's thick, there will be 6 matzahs, and if it's thin, you'll have 10 matzahs in a pound. I think that's what he's saying. Okay, right. For sure, Min Torah about the coming back to Bris Milah. For sure, Min Torah about Bayoim, whether Bayom Hashmini or Bayom Hashvi, it has to. Of course, there's 2 things. That it has to be during the day, and it has to be on the 8th day or later. And what we're saying in the Maskana is that if either of those was missed out, then the Maskana Hatofas Dam bris would be necessary. Okay, we'll go on to our next point, and that is one of our listeners, again, from over the recordings. So he has in his shul a fine fellow who davens slower than the average person. He comes a half an hour or more early. He starts davening about half an hour earlier, but then if the tzibur are if they by Shmona Esrei, if they're not by Shmona Esrei, he will wait for Shmona Esrei, and then he'll join the tzibur with Shmona Esrei. But then he davens so slow that they will finish Chazar Hashatz, and he finishes his quiet Shmona Esrei when they finish Chazar Hashatz. So as a result, he's missing out on answering Kedusha, etc. And so the question here is that wise advice that he should start Shemona Esrei with the minyan and miss out? Or possibly, if he starts Shemona Esrei 5 minutes earlier, which he can afford because he comes early in any case, and then he will finish Shemona Esrei. If he starts a couple of minutes earlier, he can work it out. He'll finish his Shemona Esrei the same time as the minyan, and then he will be able to answer Kedusha, etc. Okay, so the background to the question we have here in Shulchan Aruch. Here you have in Siman Tzadik, beginning of Hilchos Tefillah, second Siman. This is a thing which is not so well known. It says in Shulchan Aruch, "Mi shebol beis hakneses osur lo lahachtim tfilosei letfilas hatzibur." If you've come to shul, you should not be davening Shemona Esrei before the minyan. Perhaps it's a question whether we should be discussing it. You have sometimes people come to shul, but they are in a rush, so they daven Shemona Esrei. Very, very few, but there are occasionally people who will daven Shemona Esrei before the minyan because they want to be able to finish off whatever and rush out. So it says in Shulchan Aruch that you shouldn't to start your tefillah. If once you've come to shul, you shouldn't start your Shemona Esrei before the tzibur. Vein bebeis hakneses, whether you're going to do so in the shul, which is going to be more, kind of arousing perhaps conflict or whatever. But even if you want to go to the next room and start your Shemona Esrei early, you shouldn't be doing so. And instead, you should abide your time and start Shemona Esrei with the minyan. Because the idea of davening with a tzibur is that prayer is more appreciated, more accepted by Hashem. Unless you see that they're getting late and the tzibur are taking their time with piyutim, we don't have this question because we don't have piyutim in the Yotzris, in Yotzer Eir, but in the Minhag Ashkenaz, so you'll have in Birchas Krishma, you have extra piyutim. So if he sees that they're taking their time on piyutim, and as a result, there's going to miss Zman Tefillah, so that's a head for him to daven early. But meanwhile, we're seeing here that the person is right, that he shouldn't be starting Shemona Esrei before the minyan. But then look at this reason. But if he is davening slower, so on the contrary, you could say that by him starting earlier, he's going to be davening with the minyan. So there's a bit of a room there. So what we have on the upper part of the screen, so we have here a quote from the Sefer Piskat Shuvas, and he's a malaket. So he writes, if he's used to davening Shemona Esrei, Zman Memushach, he takes his time on Shemona Esrei. And as a result, is missing out in answering Kedusha and Omen Chazas Hashatz. So there are those who write that he is a Rashai Lahaktim Shemona Esrei Lifnei HaTzibur. He is allowed to start Shemona Esrei earlier. Kadesha Yuchal Ligmeir B'Shovim HaTzibur. He's allowed to start a few minutes earlier, work it out, that he should complete his Shemona Esrei at the same time as the Tzibur. And then he'll be able to answer Omen Kedusha during Chazos Hashatz, as everyone else does. Then he says, although he's allowed to do so, he's not obliged to do so. If you take your time, of course, the main thing of tefillah is kavanah, and if it takes you more time to have your kavanah, that's paramount. And then there are those who say, no, don't do this shtick, and you should actually start with the minyan, even though as a result, you will miss out on answering everything. So there are opinions either way. So I answered that I would advise that he should start a bit earlier. In this way, he'll be able to answer Kedusha. And by the way, I know that they struggle for a minyan sometimes. If he starts a few minutes earlier, then he will be able to make up their minyan for Chazar Hashatz instead of them having to wait another few minutes, which again, in a small minyan in a small town, is actually can be a, how do you say, a dampener on people coming to minyan if they have to start waiting around. I see a couple of points on the chat. So we've got here some solutions that, okay, let's move on. So certainly Lahachdin Tvilose is talking about Shmona Esrei. He shouldn't start his Shmona Esrei before the minyan, but in this case where he davens so much slower, so therefore it's the purpose of Lispal Limatzibur can be achieved by actually starting a bit earlier, and in Lispal Limatzibur will be that he'll daven with them the second part of the Shmona Esrei, and he'll complete with the tzibur. Okay, so you can see there's different opinions here. You're mentioning about Shemeh. Someone's mentioning Shemeh Ka'oine. Yeah, but it's still not it's Ka'oine, and especially if you're going to have this, if he's going to be short of a minyan, if he doesn't have Tisha Oinim, the fellow who's davening Shemona Esrei with the Shemeh Ka'oine is not going to be able to make up the Tisha Oinim. So I think in a smaller place, he would actually be doing a favor for the tzibur if he starts a bit earlier and he's able to finish off along with them. And we see this a poskim who say that that's okay, and I think I would go along with that. Okay, let's move on. So here sorry, I didn't put on the screen. Pesach is Yodecha. In the Alter Rebbe's Siddur, Pesach es Yodecha has got upside down segels on the three words Pesach es Yodecha. It's actually got twice upside down segel on each word, and the last three letters, the Soifi Tavis, is Ches Tov Chof, which means chatach, or a chunk. The idea of the Eibush to giving a portion of Parnosa to each person. We discussed it at shiur, not around Rosh Hashanah time. And then the first three letters, Pei Aleph Yud. Pei Aleph Yud equals 91, and that is the gematria of Omein. It's also the gematria, I think, of Havaya Adni, 65 and 26. Yeah, 65 and 26 is 91. Yeah. So there are kavonas in the Pesach Yodecho, and the Gemara says, why do we say Ashrei every day? So the most important part of Ashrei is this pasuk of Pesach Yodecho, and possibly the fact that we touch the tefillin at this point is also like a reminder to have kavona at this pasuk. Question is the kavona imperative also Ashrei the second time before Volotzion and Ashrei at Mincha, or is this only once a day is the kavona le'ikuva? This is the question which I was asked to address. Now, someone has written about this. Someone picked up that in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Kuf Aleph, in passing, talks about things about repeating, if you didn't have kavona, about repeating. So we don't repeat Shemona Esrei for lack of kavana, because likelihood is the second time you'll also have a lapse of kavana. But when it comes to Shema, so the main thing is the first pasuk. So then if you realize you didn't have a kavana at the pasuk of Shema, so you say it's a pasuk again, because one pasuk you can handle. But then he says v'chein pasuk Pesach es Yodecha shebepsuke de zimra, that if you didn't have kavana, you should repeat the pasuk. So now, why does the Alter Rebbe add the word Shebepsuke de Zimra? You could say it's because otherwise you could say it's even when you're saying Tilim. But on the other hand, you could say that it's Psuke de Zimra only the once a day is Ma'akiv, and the other two times it's not Ma'akiv. So there's a little bit not so clear. Reb Chaim Noah writes clearly that it's Ma'akiv the other times also. And if my theory of the fact that we touch the tefillin is to stimulate your kavana at this point, the fact that we do so also by Ashrei Volotzion is suggesting that there's a need for kavana leikuva also by Ashrei Volotzion. So it's not so clear. I've seen also, although it says in one girsa it says Ha'oim David Sholish Palmim B'chol Yoyim. Other places it says Ha'oim B'chol Yoyim. It doesn't. The argue so is, but it doesn't say about Tilo David, which is Ashrei 3 times a day. Just once a day is the main emphasis. So if it's only once a day is the main emphasis, so then Kavana is only Milikuva the once. Okay, so there's room to be makel and say that it's not necessary Milikuva the other times. Let's go on. Okay, as we're coming close to Chodesh Nisan, no one asked me this question, but I feel I should address it. Every year you open up the Hamish newspapers and you have pictures of Feine Gute Yidden who are going out with a whole group of people out into the fields to make a bircha soilones. Chabad, we never saw such a thing, but fine. Everyone's narrow pashte, fine. But meanwhile, we look at the Lashon. This is from the Alter Rebbe's Siddur, Pesach Bersanen, Perikut Gimel. This is Lashon Abraisa. Hayoytse b'mei Nisan. Person went out during Nisan, and he sees trees. He saw trees which are producing blossoms. He says, "You make a bracha, etc." And you only make a bracha the first time. So now there's 2 issues here which I want to raise. First of all, the Alter Rebbe says, "B'mei Nisan." The Rebbe has a letter about this. What happens if you didn't see it in Nisan, you saw it in Iyar? Is it so? In the Alter Rebbe wrote earlier a sefer on brachas called Luach Birchas Hane'anin, and then the Luach Birchas Hane'anin, it's apparent that even if it's the season of Nisan, you can still say the bracha. But in the next edition, the latest edition, the Seder Birchas Hane'anin, which we're more familiar with, he says B'mei Nisan, and so the Rebbe learns that it's limited to the month of Nisan. So the bracha, although it's got to do with seasons, and seasons depend on the solar cycle, not so much on it doesn't depend on which month it is in the Jewish calendar. It depends on the solar when it is in the spring, etc. And yet the halacha is limited, perhaps for reasons of Kabbalah, it's limited to Chodesh Nisan. Now that's very relevant this year, because it's a leap year, so Chodesh Nisan is a week or more later. It's a bit later, and therefore there could be the trees which are blossoming have already blossomed now. But now you can't make the bracha because it's not Nisan. Then we say the second halacha. Now this is the Alter Rebbe is not everyone agrees with the Alter Rebbe on this. The Alter Rebbe says it's only the first time. So what happens if you were walking and you saw a tree with blossoms, you didn't have a siddur with you? You don't know the bracha, you don't know Baal Peh. Nowadays in Shkentaretz, you have it on your phone. You have a siddur on your phone, you can find it, yeah? Or you can text someone or whatever. But lo mezog, it's on Shabbos. So you don't have your siddur with you. So next time you come back, you can't make a bracha. It's only b'pam harishona. It's only first time you encountered it. As a result, if you see now the minhag is to say a bracha only on a tree which produces fruit, edible fruit. So if you see within this week a tree with edible fruit, see its blossoms, then that would preclude you from me saying the bracha during Chodesh Nisan. So next time you pass where you know there's a fruit tree, so put on your blinkers, so you should be able to say bracha in Chodesh Nisan. Someone's pointing out that Australia can't make the bracha on blossoms. I guess so. I guess they cannot. Just go back for a moment. Oh, I can't go back. Okay. Yeah, already gone to the next question. Can you say the bracha on Shabbos? Yes, there's no problem to say it on Shabbos. If it's within Rosh Hashanah, then you have a siddur there, or you remember the part of the bracha, you can say it on Shabbos. It's not a problem. Right. All right, so we have the last point which I have, and I'll finish a couple of minutes early, and you'll forgive me, I'm sure. So we had a couple of last week and 2 weeks ago, I spoke about using tea bags on Shabbos, and so someone is persisting and asking, what about swirling the bag inside the glass to be able to get more essence out of the bag? Now, if you remember, we had gone through this, that to pour water through a strainer, and it goes in clear water, comes out brown because it's picked up flavor from the strainer, is not a problem of boirer, it's not a problem of masanin, and that would be essentially permitted. You're not straining the tea leaves. They are all safely sitting inside the strainer. And what's going in is picking up flavor, but it's not a concept of boirer. That's fairly clear. So now the tea bag is the same idea, that there's no boirer or straining with the stuff in the tea bag. But let's read what Rav Forkash addresses this. This is, as you can see, it's Sefer Shabbos Halocho, Chelik Beis, Dalet, Siflam Dalet. So to put in a tea bag into a glass of hot water. So we'd have to avoid the question of bishul, so that goes into Kli Shlishi, as was discussed in an earlier chapter in his first volume. He doesn't see that as a problem of boirer, although obviously the water is penetrating into the bag, and then it's going out of the bag into the rest of the cup. And that's not a problem of boirer. As I said, everything is safe. There's no jumbled state. There's no problem of boirer. Then he says, "L'nanea hasakit kashehi menutuna b'tech hamayim." Because hamayim, to sway, to move around the tea bag as it is within the cup of water. Nechleko haposkim im muter. He says there's a debate in poskim whether it's permitted. If you're going to drink it right away, in other words, it's oichel min hapsoiles, and you want to use it right away, so he's matir, and he gives a ha'ora. I'm not going to go into the ha'ora now, but he does. Basically, he says it is permitted if you're going to have the glass of tea right away. So that's the answer. To be able to sway the tea bag back and forth within the cup of hot water would not be a problem of boirer or basan. So that's the end of the shiur for tonight. As far as the continuation of this year, and thank you for all of your joining us regularly. It's a tremendous chizuk. And we had the votes for Thursday or Sunday. I didn't make a mamish account, but it was pretty much even. Now, so therefore, I'm going to go for Thursday evening, and because when you have a suffolk, so a good thing you make earlier rather than later. And what I would suggest is that whoever wants to have the minhag hatov of listening to the shiur Matzo Shabbos, I can send them the link for the recording, and so they will be able to listen to. If the Thursday night, so by Friday morning, the recording should be available. Be'ez Hashem, thank you to my son Yaakov, who sets it up every Matzo Shabbos. So he'll do it on on Thursday night. So for Matzo Shabbos, you'll have it there available. Looking at the calendar, we've got this Thursday and the next Thursday. The Thursday after that is B'dikas Chometz, and so I will apologize now. I'm not going to do a shiur in the middle of B'dikas Chometz, and I don't think you're going to be listening either. On the other hand, the next Thursday after that is the night of Shvi Shel Pesach. My phone doesn't work at that time, but I would possibly do something on Wednesday night of Chol HaMoed, and if I do have something ready to share with you, I'll share with you I'll tell you in advance through the same medium as till now. So yeah, what do we have here? Someone is suggesting Palm Rishona of this tree. If he finds later another tree with a later bloom, he can, as all prunus. I don't think so. I think once he's already had the opportunity of saying the bracha, and he didn't say the bracha, so then I don't think he can say it later, but fine. So Thursday, someone is pointing out that Sunday's before Thursday. Thank you. Okay, I realize that. What time will the shiur start? I'm thinking of doing it at 8:30. I think it's a little bit easier for myself, and I think others also, 8:30 rather than 8 o'clock. Like this, those who have little children will be able to tuck them into bed. So unless people dafka want it earlier, but I'm at aim for 8:30 this coming Thursday, Bez Hashem. All right, so I wish you all a gute Woche and seid alle gesund and kol tov.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is it possible to get the slides from the shiur without listening to the record, without having to go through the whole recording?